I want to bring in former Fed Governor Frederic Mishkin. He's now a Columbia University professor and a CNBC contributor. And Rick, it's really good to see you. It's been a while since we've gotten the chance to talk to you. You've got a new paper that's out, and it basically says that the Fed is damned if they raise rates, damned if they don't. You want to explain that?
Well, I don't know if I'd put it quite that way, but the bottom line is that in this paper, which we presented at the U.S. Monetary Policy Forum, that one of the things we did is we looked at the history, and then we actually did some economic modeling. And the history says, you look at 16 cases of where central banks actually tightened interest rates when, in fact, they had to get inflation down. And this is in many countries, not just the U.S. In every single case, you got a recession. And so, maybe this time is different, but that's usually dangerous thinking. So just on that basis alone, the likelihood of a recession is extremely high. And this is particularly true also from an economic theory viewpoint. When a central bank gets behind the curve, as the Fed certainly did, they made a bunch of mistakes, particularly in 2021, which, as you might know, I've been on CNBC since April of 2021, being very critical of the Fed on this. When you get behind the curve, in order to get inflation back under control, you have to raise rates a lot. And in fact, you inevitably have a recession. So this is just life. The Fed is actually doing the right thing now. They've actually gotten on board to do what they have to do. They stopped being gradual. They stopped being. They were not preemptive. They now are. But the bad news is that you got to get the economy to slow down in order to get inflation down when it's actually burst up in a way that it has recently.
Well, Rick, let me just say there are other people who look at what you're talking about in history, where Feds try and raise rates and inevitably we wind up in a recession. They say it's just because, some people will say it's because the banks will raise interest rates for too long, go too far, as some people are arguing our central bank is doing right now. There are people calling for a pause, saying wait and look around and see the lag effect before you continue to raise rates at additional paces. What do you say back to that?
This is super dangerous thinking. So one of the things we look at in the paper is we look at a situation which had a lot of parallels to now, which was the Volcker disinflation. And many people, Volcker's a huge hero. Many people don't really remember what went on there. The Federal Reserve, in October 79, after Volcker became chair, raised interest rates to very high levels, and 17% actually was pretty high level. And then a recession started and they backed off. The result was that inflation did not come down. Expected inflation did not come down. And in fact, there was no ability to control inflation. The Fed had lost its credibility and now weakened it. But to Volcker's credit, he then realized that this was a mistake. And then the Fed really took out the baseball bat, clobbered heads big time, raised federal funds rate to over 20%. And then finally, it took several years of very high interest rates then to get inflation down. So it is super dangerous thinking to think that the Fed should pivot, that when central banks have done that, they haven't completed their job, they lose credibility. And particularly important is when you've actually gotten behind the curve, you have to reestablish credibility, and therefore you have to be tough. Now, it's true that you might go too far. Central banking, by the way, is not an easy business. It's there's a lot of art to it. There is science. Economists have contributed to that science of monetary policy, but a lot is art, and so you never quite get it perfect. But on the other hand, thinking that you need to back off because you're too worried about a recession is what produces much worse recessions than otherwise occur. People forget that the recession that occurred after the Volcker disinflation was actually the most severe in the post-war period. In fact, the unemployment rate went to above what it did during the global financial crisis. This is really something that you really don't